Hi guys, Jamie here from JB Motion. In today's video, we're going to be making this. So we're going to be starting this off in After Effects, bringing in the footage, which is downloadable from the description below, turning it into an image sequence, which Cinema 4D prefers when we're going to be using the native Cinema 4D motion tracker. Once we've tracked the footage, we're then going to be creating the red cloth, and then we're going to be rendering it out, bringing it all into After Effects, and adding the finishing touches. So let's get started on this. Here we go. Okay guys, so what we need to do first is we need to turn our video footage into an image sequence, because we need the image sequence if we're going to be tracking using the native tracker inside of Cinema 4D. It wants an image sequence. So let's do that now. Let's double click in this panel here, and you guys can download this movie. This is the video we're going to be using. You can download it from the description below. So let's bring that in, and we're going to first of all hold down Control Alt and hit G on your keyboard. We're going to round off the frames per second to 24. The reason we're doing that is just to make everything easier for us going forward into Cinema 4D. I don't even think you can set a frame rate of whatever that was before we rounded it off. So just click OK on that. Now we have this 24 frames per second video footage. We're going to create a new composition like that. And this is our video footage. So we're not going to be using the entire clip because, you know, it'll take a long time to render, and it doesn't need to be that long. We are going to be starting it from around here. But if we wanted to make it really easy for ourselves, we should be starting around here, because then we're not going to have to worry about the shadows that would be cast by the cloth as the guy is running along. There's going to be shadows being cast, but here there won't be, because it's already a shaded area, so we won't have to worry about shadows. We could do that, but we're not going to do that. We're going to try and do it from around here. So we're going to have a part where the shadow is going to be cast by the cloth, then the guy is going to run into the shaded area, and then we're going to be making that shadow disappear, I suppose. We're going to be doing that in After Effects, I think. Probably we will be. It'll probably be easier to do it in After Effects just to mask stuff out. So that's the reason why you might want to just start from actually around here to avoid all that. You know, if you want a quick kind of an effect just to get something cool, start from there. But we're going to start from this part and add a bit more believability to this whole thing. So, okay, I'm rambling. So what we're going to do is trim the comp. So we press B. Timeline is around here. It's on frame 85. Hit B on your keyboard. That's going to set the start work area. The work area start. Hit Control, Shift, and X, and that's going to trim the comp to the work area. Now you can see that if we export this now as an image sequence, when we bring this into Cinema, Cinema is going to read it, and it's going to be starting on frame 85. We don't want that. So with the composition selected, hit Control K to bring up the composition settings, and we're going to set the start time code to 0000. Hit OK, and now our frame is going to be starting at 0000, and everything's at 0. So now we can start. We can save this out now as an image sequence. So let's go to Composition. Where is it? Add to render queue, and we're going to go and set this as a PNG sequence. Click OK, and as you can see, I've already saved out my image sequence. So I've gone, I have from frame, where is it? How many frames? So I have that many frames, and that's what I have rendered out. So just select a place to save the image sequence, and you can turn off save in subfolder if you've already created a folder for it to go in. You don't need a subfolder. And then just click on render. But as I've already done that, I'm going to skip this step, and you guys can join me once your image sequence is finished rendering. So now what we do is we jump into Cinema with our image sequence rendered out, and we hop into the track layout. So you guys are probably in standard. Just hop into the track layout. We're going to double click here to create a motion tracker object and double click again to select the footage we're going to use. And this is it. Click on any one of those frames. Let's go into the objects here and click on again on the motion tracker. Go to the footage tab. I'm going to bring up the resampling up to 100% so it's nice and crisp. And we're just going to play this back so that all of our frames are going to load themselves into cache. And once they have done that, then the playback will be a lot smoother. So it would be cool actually to do a tutorial where a train is going towards the guy, like a game of chicken between him and the train wins. Okay, so that's all loaded into cache, so we'll get a bit smoother playback. It's not great, but if you have a better machine than I do, this playback should be close to real time. Okay, cool. So, steps for tracking this. Now, we want to track everything in this shot. Okay, we're getting some nice real-time playback there, where we were a second ago. We want to track this shot, but we only want to track, well, I should say, the only thing we don't want to track is this guy, because his arms are flailing, his legs are flapping up and down. So he's going to confuse the Cinema 4D motion tracker. So we don't want that. So the first thing we need to do is, with our motion tracker selected, where are we going to go? We're going to right click and we're going to go to tracker tags and we're going to add a mask constraint. Now I thought that would be down here in the options in the track, but obviously not. But anyway, right click, go to tracker tags and we're going to add a mask constraint. Now what we can do is I'd like to be able to draw this actually. Just bear with me 2 seconds. Go to standard and track. Okay, well, I thought I'd have a load of options down here, but it's not to be. So we're going to have to do it the hard way. Right click, well, it's not the hard way, but it's just a lot more convenient when those buttons are down there. Right click, go to tracker tags, and let's add again a mask constraint. And we're going to use 0 on our keyboard. That's going to give us our rectangle selection tool. And we're going to select this one, hit E on your keyboard to bring up your move tool. So we're using 0 and E. 0 and E on your keyboard. That's going to make this a bit quicker. Make sure you're on frame 0 as well for this initial setup. 0, E, and 0, and then E again, and 0 and E. So that's going to be the first frame. You can see we've got a keyframe in there as well. And now we're just going to scrub along until this guy looks like he's moving out of that mask. We're going to select it all and we're just going to move that up. Cinema 4D is going to fill in the gaps here for us. And go to the last frame, 0 for the rectangle selection, E to go back to your move tool and just kind of fix that up. We might need to move this down a bit because his feet are getting out of that a little bit. And that looks like his feet are going out a little bit there as well, so we'll fix that. So around here, we'll bring that down. Okay. So now our guy is going to be masked out of this track. And we can confirm that by clicking on the tag here and exclude from mask is selected. This is going to be active from frame 0 all the way to the very last frame. So that's that done. The next thing we're going to do now is we're going to start tracking the footage because we've already masked out the guy. So now we can start tracking everything else inside of the footage. So click on your motion tracker, go to footage, go to 2D tracking, and we're going to create some auto tracks. So we're going to create more than that. We're going to go for 700 and click on create. Back to frame 0 before you do that. Click on create auto tracks. And now you can see we have a load of auto tracks created everywhere outside of the mask that we created. So now we're just going to track forward because we're on frame 0, so we want to track forward. So let's click on this track forward button. And that's going to process each of the frames from frame 0 all the way to the end, and it's going to do its best to track whatever pixels it takes a fancy to. So that tracks as far as about here. Then we lose all our track points, so let's go to the last frame, and we'll create some more auto tracks. And this time we're going to track backwards. So now we have some track points at the end. We'll lose them in the middle. So let's go to around the middle, create some more auto tracks. And because we're in the middle this time, we're going to track forwards and backwards. So click on this one. So now we have beginning, we have beginning, we have middle, and we have end. But we do have some gaps. Now we can fill those in just by putting the mark time indicator here around there, create some more auto tracks, and then auto track that again. Now I do believe that Cinema actually would fill in these gaps, because it would take the ones at the beginning and then it would take the ones in the middle and it would kind of interpret the direction that they were moving in and give us a way to fill in the gaps, but I'm not entirely sure about that. So just in case, I'm just kind of manually filling in the gaps here. As it only takes like half a minute to do so. It could be a good time saver in the long run, but yeah, I need to test it out without actually being so without filling in those gaps and see if it still works. Okay, so now we have loads of track points, so we're ready to do the full solve. That's going to give us our camera. So click on your motion tracker. We'll do a file save as actually before we go any further. Save project as, and we will go into the folder that we have set up. And we'll call this tracks jogger tracked. Okay, so now back to frame 0, and we can do the full solve. Into the 3D Solve tab and click on the Run 3D Solver. So that is going to take a little bit of time, so I'm going to pause the video here and then I'll pop back in once that's done. Okay, so that's finished. And if we deselect our motion tracker, now you're going to see that we have all these little green dots. They are track points, and they're going to be following along with the whatever they've decided to track. So it looks like we got a bit of a wobble there already. But because we're dealing with something that's not actually on the ground, I think we're going to get away with it. Everything else looks pretty solid. Okay, so next steps is, so we want to create a world center, because if we create an object now, it's going to be right in front of the camera. So we don't want that. We want to create a world center, and we could probably do that around the center time frame, the center frame of the footage. So around here, somewhere like that. So let's find, if we select our motion tracker and go to tracker, and where is it? Is it even here? Constraints, create position constraint. Okay, yeah, so this is actually an easier way to do it if you go from this menu. So now we can just click and it will work. Okay, cool. So now that's set this position as the world center. So you can see we got our, what are they called? Our, yeah, world axis. Our world axis is there. So now if we create a cube, Now it's pretty big, that's why it's taking up the whole camera. But if we put it to 10 by 10 by 10, you can see that that's going to be generated right at world center, and it's going to be on the floor because the tracks, this is going to be confusing, but the train tracks are being tracked, so it knows where the floor is based off of that. So if we just go back, just have a look at this, you can see our cube is following along there. Now we do get a bit of a wobble, but we're going to get away with it because the cloth is hovering above the ground, so it's not going to be noticeable at all, really. We hope. Okay, so that's that. The next step is we're going to create a vector constraint. Now, a vector constraint is going to basically tell Cinema what direction. So we're going to be selecting 2 points, and we're going to tell Cinema that these 2 track points go in the Z direction. They go in the Z direction. And we're also going to tell Cinema the distance between them so that it knows how to scale objects correctly. So if we create this guy, obviously he's way too big. He needs to be about the same size as the guy in our video footage when he's created. So that's what the vector constraint does. So we're going to create, click on the motion tracker, go to tracker, and go to constraints, and we're going to create a vector constraint. Now, I did a bit of research, and apparently the distance between the center point of one of these, they're called sleepers, the distance between the center point of 2 sleepers is about 56 centimeters. So if we find kind of like, let's say like these 2 points here, so they look like they're at around the midpoint of these 2 sleepers beside each other. So we can select this one and this one. And now we're going to get options to tell Cinema what direction those are going in. So they're going in the Z direction, and the length is known, and it's around 56 centimeters. So now if we create a little figure, you can see that he's more appropriately sized. If we scrub back, he's kind of a bit smaller than he should be. So what we can do is go back into this vector constraint tag, and we could bring this down possibly. Yeah, bring that down until he's about human size, just to kind of so something like 50 centimeters looks good to me. Okay, so let's have a look at this now, see what it's looking like. Just want to turn this off visibility wise so I can see the figure, see what it's doing. I'm going to turn off the work plane as well so it's not confusing us. So we do get a bit of a bad jump there. I'm not quite sure why that happened. Just not the best track, unfortunately. But as opposed to going all the way back to step 1 now and trying to figure that out, we're just going to have to live with it. It could be because we didn't have enough track points or something, because we did create the mask. It looks like just as the guy's running past him, it's when it kind of happens, but we might be able to fix that jump inside of After Effects, but everything else outside of that one jump is good. So we'll be able to work with it. We could be able, we may be able to fix it in After Effects with some position keyframes or something like that. So let's do a file save. And now what we do is we're going to create our cloth. So let's grab a plane object, and we are going to set this to be on the plus X orientation. So if we go to our top view, hit S on your keyboard. That's not working. Where is the plane object? Make sure object mode is selected, and then if we hit S on our keyboard, oh, it's just bring. Oh, okay. The plane is obviously right there. I just can't see it. If we go to our move tool now, you'll be able to see it. This is our plane that we just created. We put it on the, we set the orientation to +X. You can see it better from the right view here. So size-wise, we're going to scale down the width of this and pull it up along the Y. We're using our little figure guy for reference here of our human. And this is gonna be as long as the tracks pretty much, or at least the tracks that we can see. So we're gonna have to go for like 4,000 something, well, not even, that's not even long enough. But we could push this back. We're gonna have to double this, I'd say, or even go 10,000. Let's see, where's our camera? It's here. So I just turned off I made the motion tracker visible there again so I can see my camera. Okay, so now we don't need the cloth. Let's call this cloth. We don't need this to extend past what the camera can see on frame 0 because, you know, it's not going to be able to see it. So we don't need to add that extra geometry. So let's bring this up to just about where the camera is able to see. And do we have it going now too far? Let's see. Because it's actually very hard to see, really. Let's grab another figure. And we'll just hold down Control. Is that working? Okay. It's weird. Okay. Do you know what we're going to do? Ignore me. We're going to just go to the last frame, which is way easier. Select our cloth, and now you can actually see we actually did a great job on that. So that's set to a height of 10,000 and a width of 62. So obviously it's confusing because you'd imagine that that should be inverted. It's because the orientation set to +X. So that's our cloth set up. So if well, it's not the cloth set up, it's the plane set up. We still have a few steps to go before it looks like a cloth. But if I just get rid of this, I'm going to make the motion tracker invisible for the time being. So you can see that the man is going to be running. We're still going to see the cloth in front of him, but with After Effects, we're going to mask that out. So you can't actually see it. You'll only be able to see it behind him. So it looks as though, you know, he's, I'll turn off this world axis as well. So it looks as if the cloth is actually coming from his back. I think we need to adjust some things here because if I go into my top view, turn back on the visibility of my motion tracker, and if I look at the camera, it's actually lined up pretty well. So I'm looking at the line, this center line, and I'm kind of checking that it's parallel to the work plane line. And it actually is very, very close. So let's just grab our cloth and we can, what do we need to do? If I go to the last frame, it's very well lined up. But if I go to the first frame, it's not great. So let's see if rotating this ever so slightly. Yeah, that looks better on frame 0 anyway. It looks better. By the way, I'm holding down Alt so I can get tiny adjustments to my rotation parameter here. If you just grab it and twist it, it's going to be like these big, huge jumps. But if you press Alt before you click and drag, you'll be able to make smaller adjustments. So let's go to, that looks good now on frame 0, but it looks good on the last frame as well. So if we play that now, turn this off again. So now you can see that the cloth, oh, that jump is terrible really, isn't it? It's making me not want to, like, hang on, where is the jump? I can't even notice it now, to be honest. But anyway, let's continue on. But it looks like an awful jump. It's gonna be pretty jarring when this is finished. It's a shame. Yeah, there it is. See that jump there? It's a bad old jump. But again, we may be able to sort it out in a... I wonder, could we sort it out here? If we just open up our dope sheet. Let's have a look at this. So what frame is the jump on, first of all? Right there. There's one jump and another jump. First jump happens around here. So if we open up the dope sheet and we find that frame, let's select all of these frames, hit tab on your keyboard. Why is tab not working? Okay, so we're gonna have to go to view, F curve. Don't know why tab isn't working. And just zoom in. I'm using Alt to zoom in, by the way. So it looks quite straight. There's a bit of a bump there. This is the, what is this? Position Z, is it? Position Z? Should be, I'd say. Maybe it's position Y. No, it's position Z, okay. So there's a bit of a bump there. Well, let's have a look at position X. Zoom all the way out again. Where's position? I'll just click on the solved camera so I can... Where's all my stuff gone? Okay. Ah, I can't believe tab isn't working. Tab always works to switch between dope sheet and F curves. So I'm going to go view, F curve again. And let's see if we can find... Okay, look at this now. So that looks really, really terrible. So I don't know if we're going to be able to fix this jump. We can try. We'd probably be quicker trying to do it in After Effects instead of kind of messing in here now. But we'll give it a shot. So I'm going to have to bring this over to my other monitor. So you guys won't be able to see what I'm doing. So that's not going to be very good, is it? Okay, so I'll just dock this then so that you guys can see what I'm doing. And I'll zoom in on this. So that's the jump. Smooth jump. That's the jump. So that's obviously where we're getting the jump from. You can see there's a big jump in the F curve here. So I don't know what to do to fix this. I bet you there's like a button that just smoothens it all out, but I'm not sure what that is. Maybe if I just kind of try and straighten this. Again, I'm kind of not really sure what I'm doing here now. That makes it a little bit smoother, I think. Do you know what? That doesn't look too bad. Still a jump, but it's not like a very, like, if I undo that. It's not as bad, and I'll redo that. Yeah, I think that works actually. Hang on, let's make this bigger. Yeah, I think that's a lot better. It's not as kind of like darty or something. Okay, cool. I'm happy with that. That's fine. So now if we watch this back, should be looking pretty good. Little bit of a jump, but it's not half as bad as it was. And then everything else is nice and smooth. Okay, cool. Let's do a file save project. And what we're going to do now is jump into our side view, just have a quick look at everything. I want to turn this visibility back on. Everything's looking quite good. So, cloth. Okay, so we're going to start creating this cloth simulation. Where's our guy? I'd like to have our guy there, just so I don't feel so alone. Now, this guy is here, so the cloth is coming out of his back, so the height of this, or the width of it really, we'll call it the height, is good. We need more segments because we want the cloth to be flapping all around the place and everything like that. So we're going to go for the maximum amount of segments on the height, which is 1,000. We can't get any more than that. And because this is so long, we're actually not getting as many segments as I would like. We can go up to like 29 or something like that on the width segments. So segments wise, we're good to go. So let's go to our cloth object, right click, go to simulation tags, and we're going to add a cloth tag to it. So now if we hit play, we'll do a file save before we do that. Now if we hit play, the simulation should kick in now any second, and then the cloth is going to fall down to the ground, and we don't want it to do that. So we're going to hit Control D on our keyboards, go to the simulation tab, go into the scene tab, going to turn gravity down to 0. So now nothing's going to happen. But we do want the cloth to be flapping around, so we're going to add some turbulence into our scene. So the cloth is going to be like waving in the wind. So go to Simulate, go to Forces, and let's add a turbulence object. Let's bring up the strength and the scale of this to, we'll try something like that for now and see what it looks like. Now if we hit play, now you can see that the cloth is actually starting to do something, which is great. So it's waving like kind of cloth would, I suppose. And if we go into this, into our solved camera view now, and we just play this, let's have a look at what it's looking like. Okay, so that's looking pretty cool. Now we're at the moment, if we just pause this, go into our right view, do a Control S, you can see that the turbulence is affecting the whole cloth. Now we don't want the whole cloth to be affected, because by the time our jogger gets to here, it's going to be so, you know, deformed that it's not even going to look like it's coming out of his back. You know, if we jump in here, it's already kind of flying above his head. So we don't want the turbulence to have any effect on the cloth until the jogger runs past that point, you could say. So if we go back to frame 0, where's our little guy? So if we go into our top view and we just push our guy down, push him towards the camera, not away from the camera, till he's like right beside our guy. Okay, you can see that our scale is actually way off, by the way. Because look, if we line up his feet with this guy's feet, he's a giant. So our vector, our length of our vector frame should be like 56, possibly. Yeah, so I think that works better. Let's line up the feet again. Yeah, so that was actually, I was actually right the first time, I just didn't have this lined up. So the distance between the sleepers, between the midpoint of each sleeper is 56 centimeters, according to Google. I'm no train track expert, but I looked it up. So that scale seems a bit better. I'm just going to have it play this now. So don't worry that the cloth isn't actually going out of the shot, because we're going to need a couple of frames for the cloth to actually start, you know, flapping, start being displaced. So we're not going to start the animation. We're going to render it all out, but we're going to cut it to start at about this frame. But anyway, okay, what are we talking about? So we're saying we don't want the turbulence to have any effect on the cloth until the time where our guy, which is now being represented because he starts around here. If we go back, this is around the point where he starts. We don't want the cloth turbulence, we don't want the turbulence to have any effect on the cloth until the guy starts running past it. So to do that, we're going to select the turbulence object, go into the Fields tab, and we're going to create a box field. And we want to go into coordinates, and we're just going to bring this back along the Z now. We can just drag it, be quicker. And we're going to go to object and select the box field actually, and we can just use these orange circles to make this bigger. So we're going to bring that all the way back to about here, something like this. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be making the box field a child of the camera. So wherever the camera goes, the box field will follow. So that's going to mean that this turbulence field isn't going to be touching anything until the camera kind of touches it, and therefore the man touches it, because remember the camera is following the man who's running. So we'll just see what this does for us now. Let's make the box, hang on, we'll go here to the top view, just make this a bit wider. And we are going to make the box field, going to do a Control S. Going to make the box field a child of the camera. So now if we play that, you'll see that the box field is now following the cloth. So the cloth is not being affected by turbulence until the box field touches it, until the camera touches it, essentially. So let's see what that looks like in perspective. So if we just make the box field invisible for now, and make our figure invisible as well, let's see what that looks like. So now you can see that the cloth in front of the guy isn't being displaced at all. It's not being affected by turbulence at all. Let's turn off the visibility of the motion tracker as well. But the cloth behind the guy is being affected by the turbulence, and it continues to be affected until it's out of shot. So that's actually perfect. That was a perfect alignment of the box field. So that's good to go. So the cloth is ready. Well, it's almost ready. I am seeing that little jump there around the same place, but we're totally going to get away with it because it's like a couple of frames in a lot of frames of an animation. So that is the cloth. Like, we are going to be, if we go into Redshift now, because we're going to be rendering this out using Redshift, of course. Let's do a file save. Let's change the renderer to Redshift. And if we go into Redshift now, and I already have this layout set up. You just have to open your Redshift render view. And let's hit play on this and see what it looks like. Okay, so I get this sometimes. It just means that I have to close down After Effects because my machine can't handle it being open. So I'm going to do that now. I'll pause the video here. I'm going to close down After Effects, and then we'll pop back in a second. Okay, guys, so yeah, I just had to, I turned off After Effects, and I also had a driver to install for my graphics card as well. So now it's working. We can view it in the Redshift render view, and this is our cloth. So we can get a bit of lighting in the scene now at this stage. We can grab a dome light. And I'm going to use, for the texture, I'm just going to use a single frame from the movie sequence. So I just went in here and I just grabbed a random frame and pasted it into my main folder. So I'm going to use that for lighting. And I'm going to turn on the back plate as well so we can actually see the footage in the background. So let's load in the movie sequence into that, and we want to see the animation. Go into animation, go to the mode, turn it on to simple, so it'll actually play back, and we can set the frame rate to 24 and then detect frames. So now it's playing back. If we hit play here, we'll be able to see the video in the Redshift render view. So we need to turn up the intensity of this dome light because, you know, we're just using a basic PNG here. So let's crank up the intensity of this. So we'll get a bit of color onto our cloth as well. So let's create a new Redshift material. We'll apply it to our cloth, and we're going to go for a nice bright red. I want to go back to my dome light and bring up the exposure a bit on that as well. Something like that. And also the backplate is not very, it's quite underexposed, so let's scroll down to the backplate, crank up the exposure on that as well to something close to what it should look like, just eyeballing it. And exposure, I might bring down the exposure a little bit, something like that. I don't even know if I brought it down that much. And let's set this to original scale so we can have a look at what this is looking like. So we're getting a bit of jagged edges and stuff, so we can fix that by applying a Redshift object tag to the cloth. So right click, go to render tags, put on a Redshift object tag, and in the geometry tab turn on geometry tessellation. So that's going to smoothen everything out. It's just the Redshift's version of using a subdivision surface. Okay, so let's just have a look at this now. If we jump into standard, and we'll see what it's looking like from start to end. So we are going to have to watch this. We could cache the simulation so it will play back faster, but there's probably a few things we need to tidy up first before we go ahead and do that. So far, so good. I want to keep an eye on the point at which the turbulence happens to make sure that it stays. So you can see it's kind of dropping a bit on his back. So if I stop that now and go into this view, let's make the box field visible again and the motion tracker as well. So it appears as if the distance between the guy running and the camera isn't consistently the same. So we're going to have to increase the size of this. Let's actually just make it taller anyway, first of all, so that there's no chance of it going above the cloth. So we're going to have to change the size of this, like along the Z axis, to kind of grow at the point at which it starts dropping. So it's around here, so we'll go maybe to about frame 100, and we'll slowly start to grow this this box field. So let's set a keyframe at frame 100 or 102, thereabouts, on size Z of the field. And then we will go to maybe frame, kind of around frame 215. And then we are going to scale this up, like something like that, and add a keyframe. So now let's see what that looks like. So we need to pull the box back at the start as well, position-wise, because it's kind of, the turbulence is very close to his head, and we want it to be a bit further down, closer to his back. So let's pause that, go into our right view, and bring this box field back a bit. Let's see what that looks like. So that's a bit better. So hopefully, let's turn this off for now. Hopefully, so we set a keyframe on the box field at frame 100 or thereabouts, and we told it to start growing. So it is kind of going down a bit too low already. So we might make that start to grow a little bit sooner. Let's see what that looks like. So we're just going to have to do a few of these kind of just trial and error until we get it right. I'm wondering if there's probably an easier way to do this, but I don't know what that is. So this will do for now. Let's call it a workaround if we don't know what if there isn't a workaround for the easier way, I suppose. So it's already started to grow, but is it growing fast enough? If I just pause that, it's still dropping down, so I might tell it to grow a little bit faster, or maybe just bring this forward a bit. And then we'll try that again. It is a bit annoying that we have to keep rewinding and then re-simulating, but hopefully we'll nail it soon. So it's gonna start growing here, and it's going to finish growing here. Starts growing now. So far, so good. Yeah, that's okay. That's fine. So it's going to stop growing now. So hopefully it's grown enough and our guy doesn't outrun the camera too much after this frame. It's looking good. Yeah, it looks like the runner is gone back to maintaining a consistent distance between himself and the camera now. There was just a bit of inconsistency between, I suppose, this frame and this frame. Still looking good. I think we're going to be good. Once we're happy with this, then we can cache this simulation so that we don't have to slowly watch this over and over again. We'll be able to scrub the timeline. Yeah, I think that now we are getting a bit of a drop, all right. But it's fine. We're so close to the end, we can just cut that part off if we don't like it. Okay, cool. So now let's do a file, save, and we can cache this simulation. So click on your cloth object, cloth tag, go to the cache tab, and then let's cache the scene. So it will take a little bit of time. So again, I'll pause the video and we'll pop back in once it's done. Cool, so the simulation's cached, so now we can just scrub this. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. I wonder what it would look like if we duplicated this cloth. Would that look silly? Yeah, it would, I'd say. Might look cool. We'll come back to that. We might do maybe a duplicate and change the color. Okay, so now we have to kind of So our guy is casting a shadow, so we want our cloth to also cast a shadow. But keeping in mind that once he goes past this line here, he's no longer casting a shadow because he's in a shaded area already. So we're going to have to do a bit of masking in After Effects to basically mask out any shadow that's being cast by the cloth after this point. So we'll worry about that when we get to it. Just going to do a save project. And we can have a look at creating an area light that's going to cast a shadow onto the floor. Well, we don't have a floor yet, so let's create one. So I'm going to create a plane. I'm going to go like 1500 for the width. And I'm going to go 10,000 for the height. And then we don't need any segments on this. So this is going to be our floor. And now we'll grab us an area light. Let's see. So we'll get an area light for ourselves, and we'll do that now. So Redshift area light, and let's just bring it down here because it's going to cast a shadow pretty much all along the track, I suppose. But as we just want the shadow here, this is where the actual sun is, where there's a gap in the trees. There's a gap in the trees, like right here. That's why the light's getting in there. So we'll just kind of position our area light around that position. So we'll make this a bit wider. And we'll rotate it so that it's pointing down towards the cloth. Bring it up, rotate it a bit more. Oh, not like that. Let's have a look. We need to push it, move it this way, something like that. Maybe a little bit further. Okay. So now let's see if we're going to get any shadows on our floor. So let's just turn this back on. Do a Control S to save. Let's go into my Redshift layout and let's see what this looks like. So we're getting a shadow, which is fine. So we don't want to see our floor. We just want to see the shadow. So we're going to have to add a Redshift object tag onto the floor and go into Matte, override, turn on this, and now we need to turn on shadows enabled. So now we can't see the floor, but we can see the shadows. And also, if we go into our alpha view, we need to turn on effects alpha so that when we render this out, everything in white will be rendered and everything in black won't be. We're not going to see any white there because once we turn off the background of our dome light, then we don't need to worry about that. But we're keeping that on for now, just so we can see what we're doing. So I think that the shadow is a bit too high, so I'm going to grab the Redshift area light and bring it up a bit, because I'm just looking at the shadow of our guy. And if this is coming out of his back, then the shadow needs to come out of his back of his shadow, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to rotate this a little bit like that and bring it up a little bit further, something like that. Okay. Let's just scrub along. So the shadow is fine there for now. It's when we get into this part that we're still seeing the shadow, but we're going to mask that out in After Effects. We tend to lose, we're losing the shadow actually as we get further away from the light. And I'm wondering when we go back to this part, yeah, so it's really blowing out the color of our cloth at around this point here. So let's bring down the intensity of this maybe. And then that's basically reducing the density of our shadow as well. But we're still getting some shadow. And I think it's not looking too bad. It actually kind of works too, because as we get further away from the light source, the cloth becomes darker, as you'd expect it to, as the trees are shading, casting that shade, blocking the sun. So I think this could work for us. Just going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to do a region, hold down Shift and drag to do a render region. And, oh, not this nonsense again. Oh, okay, we have it again. So why isn't that, is that not going to let me do a render region? Maybe if I make it smaller. Man, come on. I mean, my graphics card isn't that bad. Like, certainly wasn't until recently, anyway. Which I suppose makes sense as it ages. Okay, well, let's forget about that then. Turn off this and we'll have to make do with this and have faith that all that noise will be gone on render. What we can do is we can do a file save, and I'm going to just render out one frame just to see what it looks like. So we won't save this. We'll render out the current frame. And let's see what this looks like. It's not going to let me render. Okay, I'm going to have to turn off Cinema and start this again. This is getting annoying, but I'll pop back in a second once this is done. But yeah, it's looking pretty good. And hopefully it won't look... So if I just like play this, we're obviously going to be cutting away the first few frames. We're going to render them. We don't need to render them out actually if we're cutting them away, as long as we have the simulation cached. So if I pause that here, yeah, like we're going to have to do a bit of messing around in After Effects, because there's shading here and this is still really exposed to the light. So we can kind of do a bit of, using some masks. We could mask this and make it a bit darker so that it's more shaded. Then it goes into the light so it gets brighter. And then as we go along, is the shadow high enough before I go any further? So let's turn this off, turn this on. Yeah, it is. It's high enough, isn't it? Go a bit higher. Maybe like that. turn it off and on. Yeah, okay. I think that's fine. I don't want to be messing around with this for ages. But overall, I think it's looking quite good. As we go further, goes into the shaded area. We'll be able to use masks to bring down the exposure of the cloth after it crosses that point. And at some stage, at around this point anyway, the cloth's going to naturally get darker. The shadow fades because it's further away from the area light. So I think this is good to go for render, guys. Okay, let's set this up for render. So we're going to be turning off the background of our dome light because we don't want to render that out. That's gone. And we're going to make sure that when we go into alpha, we're not seeing any white areas, and especially for this part, we're seeing some nice dense shadows in our alpha. So that's all going to render out. You can see as we get into this more shaded area, the shadow becomes less dense, which is good, which is going to save us any messing around in After Effects to a certain extent anyway. And then it kind of goes along a bit further. Looks like we lose some of our floor. So maybe we should increase the width, the height of our floor. We'll just add a 2 onto this. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We'll do one more scrub. So we're going to be starting this off probably, yeah, we'll start it off at frame, say, 12. So let's go into our render settings, output, we're going to go manual, starting this off at frame 12, and we're going to go all the way to frame all the way till the very last frame. So I just copy that and paste that in there. Fine, that's our output, 1920 by 1080. Let's turn on save. We're going to turn on our alpha channel. We're not using multipass, any multipass, PNG sequence. And we're going to save this to our tracks jogger folder in a folder called sequence, and we'll call this tracks jogger sequence. That's fine. In our Redshift settings, go into advanced, and we are definitely going to be turning on motion blur, so it's going to look a lot more natural. So turn that on for sure, and that's not going to work unless you have your cloth cached, your cloth sim cached. I don't think it will work unless you have your cloth sim cached, so just make sure you cache your cloth sim before you do that. And that's it, guys. Okay, so do file, save project, stop rendering here, go to render, render queue. And I'm going to delete all these guys. And we're going to go and render, add to render queue. And there we have it. Hit play, and that's, hit play on that, and that's going to start rendering away. So it is going to take a bit of time to render, right? So if you guys want to learn how to optimize the Redshift render settings so you guys get a faster render, maybe you guys don't have the best graphics card like myself, so you don't want to wait, like, you know, for ages for this to be rendered before you move on to the next part. What I could do alternatively is I could upload the fully rendered sequence to Google Drive. I might do that actually, just to save you guys having to wait around. Then you can follow along with the rest of the tutorial. So I probably will do that. So if you're not going to wait around for your render to render, then no worries, you'll be able to download the sequence from the description below. And also, if you guys want to check out how you can go about optimizing your Redshift render settings for faster render times, I have a video on it called Redshift Compositing Tutorial Now, it's called, something along those lines. And I really go into how you can like speed up your render times in that video. So yeah, so once this is rendered, we're going to be hopping into After Effects for the finishing touches. Okay, so that's finished rendering, and again, you guys can download the full image sequence from the description below if you want to follow along with the rest of the tutorial. So we're going to jump into After Effects now, back into After Effects, and we're going to double click here so we can bring in the sequence that we just rendered out, which is this one. So just click on any of the frames and make sure PNG sequence ticked. Let's bring that in, and Control-Alt-G with the sequence selected, hit Control-Alt-G, and we need to make sure that we're going to set this to 25, I think we had this composition set to. 24 frames per second. That's what we had it set up as in Cinema 4D. It just comes in the wrong frames per second for some reason. So just set that back to 24 and hit OK. Now we bring this down, and this is the render. So it looks pretty nice. Okay. So hit N on your keyboard to set the work area end. Hit Control-Shift-X to trim the comp to the work area. So this is what we're working with. And this is looking pretty good. So we're going to just fix a few things first. We don't want any shadow there. When I say there, I mean kind of here continues on. We don't want that. We want the shadow to stop. And also we want the shadow to be less dense so that it matches up with the shading here. So what we're going to do is we're going to isolate the cloth. And we can do that using the rotor brush tool. So we can double click on this sequence layer here. That'll open it up in this window. And then grab your rotor brush tool. And we're just going to click and drag to kind of select that. And it does a really good job at selecting all of it. So what we're going to be doing is basically masking this, but it's going to do it automatically. So if we just hit spacebar now, that'll start processing. So you can see that we're going to have to go back because it's missed a good chunk. If I zoom in a bit, so we need to actually, we'll do that again. Back to your rotor brush tool, and let's just make sure we get all of that there. Now hit play, and we can just zoom back out so that we can see what we're doing. Hit Shift and forward space to fit the comp to the screen, and hit space to continue on. So if at any stage we notice that the rotor brush tool isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, we can just use space to pause it and kind of fill in the blanks. Like they're kind of it's struggling a bit to keep up, but it should be fine. I'm just keeping my eye on this now to make sure that. So there, it looks like it's kind of lost it completely. So what I'm doing it here now is I'm using space to pause, and I'm using the control, holding down control along with the left and right arrow keys to go back and forward 2 different frames. So around here is where it starts losing its mind. So it's losing the position of the cloth. So we just need to tell it where the cloth is and then hit play again. And then it kind of starts working again. So there, it looked like it kind of lost it a bit there as well. So I'm going to fix that. Now it is doing a good bit of jumping there as well. If I just go back. Yeah, like here. So here we need to mark that back in. Just going forward a few frames, holding down control using the right arrow key. So that's fine. Keep going. So it is doing a bit of jumping up at the start, but we can fix that. I'll show you how in a minute. We don't need to worry about that too much. The reason we're doing this is so that we can just isolate the cloth and then we'll have direct control over the shadow. That's what I'm doing here. So that's all looking good enough. So what we do is, to finalize this, just click on freeze, and then that's going to freeze all the frames. We won't be able to edit the rotor brush effect anymore after we freeze it, but this is basically like rendering the rotor brush tool or caching it into memory. So that's going to take a bit of time. I'll pause the video and we'll come back once it's done. Cool, so that's done. It says that the rotor brush and refine edge propagation is frozen. So we need to unfreeze if we want to make any updates to it, but we don't, so that's done. We can close this down. And now you'll see that if we solo this layer, we just have the rotor brush, or the cloth layer, separated from the shadow. So we can bring down another version of this sequence, and this is going to be the shadows. So we can control it. Now if I solo this, we're going to see the cloth and the shadow, but we're just going to put it underneath the one that we rotor brushed. We'll make this purple just so we know it's the one we rotor brushed. And this one now, we can turn down the transparency of this. If I hit T on my keyboard, it'll bring up the opacity and we can turn this down. Now you can see that we're affecting the shadow and only the shadow. We are affecting, probably, if I zoom in and just kind of go up a bit, we are affecting see, we're affecting the very tip of the cloth here, because remember when we rotor brushed this, it was kind of losing the end. It wasn't like catching on to the very end. So we are affecting that a bit. So what we can do to fix that is we can bring down another version of this sequence, put it underneath the one that's been rotor brushed, and we can just, so if I solo this, we only want the front part of this, the part that keeps disappearing, the part that wasn't correctly rotor brushed. So if I just grab my ellipse tool and I can just kind of click and drag, so we're just getting that front part of this. And now if I turn off this solo the layer, now if we, this is our shadow layer. Now we can control the shadow and we're not having any issues here with this part, the tip of the cloth disappearing. So I'm going to make the shadow like, you know, this is way too dark, as this is what it rendered out as. I'm going to bring it down so it kind of blends in a bit with this natural shading from the actual footage. Shift and forward slash to fit the comp to the screen. Shadow looks good, and everything else looks good. So I think we can just watch this back and see what it's looking like. Yeah, and that little jump that we tried to fix in cinema, we didn't fix it completely, but what we can do is, if we're still not happy with it, see, we're getting that jump. So what we can do is we can select all of these sequences. They're all the same sequence, just with different masks on them. Shift, Alt, and P to set a position keyframe on all of them. I'm just going to select all of them, hit U on my keyboard so we can see all of the keyframes that are applied. Go forward one frame by holding down Control and hitting the right arrow key. That's where we get the jump. And for that jump, which happens here, I'm just going to reposition everything. I'm going to push everything just a nudge to the left because it jumps to the right. So I'm going to use the left arrow key to nudge everything to the left. We're going to get an automatic keyframe applied to each one. And now you can see that we're not noticing that jump half as much. It's barely even noticeable. So let's watch that back again. Cool. And that's pretty much it, guys. One final thing we can do as well, if I just get my main footage here, we can just kind of, you know, make the colors pop a bit more because it looks a bit dull at the moment. So if we go to effects and presets and we grab the lumetri effect, lumetri color, double click, making sure that the footage is selected, then we can double click, it'll automatically be applied to the selected layer. Let's go into basic correction. We can bring up the exposure to like 0.2, bring up the contrast a bit, and we can go into creative, just crank up the vibrance of this as well. So we get some nice green trees and grass and stuff like that. Cool. Okay, guys. And that's it. As usual, hope you learned a lot. If you did, smash that like and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.